At my mom's funeral, while I read her eulogy through tears, my husband was boarding a flight to Dubai with his mistress. He stole my mom's medical fund to book their first-class escape, then dumped me in a voicemail. I needed something beautiful after all that grief. My family blamed me for losing him, until I found his boarding pass and hit send on an email too. I was standing at the lectern at St. Augustine on Larchmere in Cleveland, hands shaking so hard the paper rattled like a cheap flag. My mother's eulogy stared back at me in 12-point Times New Roman, water-warped from the tears I'd already cried through the wake. I could smell lilies, floor wax, and the damp wool of my cousin's suit. I spoke into the microphone, and my voice broke on the part where Mom used to save foil scraps for later, and always did. People laughed softly. Then I looked down at my phone, because I'd tucked it under the papers to read a short message my husband, Evan, promised to text me right before I stood up. "You won't be alone up there," he said. "I'll be with you." There was a voicemail. I pressed play with my thumb while I read, because grief turns you into an automatic machine, and I thought hearing his voice would steady me. The first sentence of the eulogy slid out of my mouth at the same second his voice, flat, almost bored, filled my ear. "Hey, I'm boarding, we're wheels up in 10. I needed something beautiful after all that grief. I'm sorry, you'll be okay." I forgot how to breathe. The mic fed back. People looked up. I kept reading somehow, like my lips and tongue belonged to someone else. "My mother believed in small kindnesses," I said, and in my other ear I heard the clatter of an airport gate and a woman's laugh half-muffled by his palm over the phone. Then a gate agent's voice, "Final boarding for Emirates to Dubai." He didn't just leave me. He left during my mother's funeral, with a mistress, and he used my mother's medical fund to do it. I didn't know that part yet, but you'll understand why the math started to smell later. When I finished, I walked back to the pew and sat. My brother, Matt, squeezed my knee. My aunt leaned over to whisper, "Where's Evan?" Like she was asking where I'd misplaced my purse. I swallowed sand. "Work crisis," I lied, and the word work tasted like aluminum. The choir sang. The priest swung incense. My phone burned a rectangle through my hand. After the burial at Lakeview, after the bad coffee at the church hall, after everyone told me how strong I was. Strong in that way that means isolated. I went home to the duplex in Tremont and found Evan's overnight bag gone. The closet was mostly full. He took enough to travel, not enough to confess. On the dresser, the cedar jewelry box my mom gave me at 15 sat at a strange angle. I opened it and saw my passport missing. I stood there, door to the bedroom still half open, listening for the house to tell me what it meant. We had a fund, you know. A medical fund I set up for my mom when her breast cancer came back brutal last year. I kept it in a separate savings account with Citizens Bank because hospital billing in America is a game of chicken, and I was tired of losing. I tracked every deposit, every copay, every chemo chair that squeaked when she shifted. 2 nights before she died, I moved what was left, $14,780.62, into checking because Hospice of the Western Reserve said the final bills might post fast. I told Evan. He kissed my forehead, said, "You're doing everything right." At 11:17 p.m., after the funeral, I logged into the bank with the kind of focus you get when you're about to pick at a scab you know will bleed. The balance slapped me. $1306.09. 4 transfers. 2 airline charges. 1 at a luggage store in Tower City I'd never heard of. A hotel authorization from a place in Dubai with gold filigree on the logo that made me feel sick. Then the memo line in one of the transfers. Because he's an idiot and he likes to label things he thinks are clever, read, E&M reset. M not me. M as in Mia. I didn't know her full name yet, but I knew the initial, and I knew the shade of lipstick she forgot in our backseat in June. I knew the way Evan had been going to late meetings at a marketing firm that doesn't schedule late meetings. I knew he'd been wearing cologne again like a teenager. I screenshotted everything. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were cold, steady, surgical. I searched the trash email folder for clues because he isn't clever, he's just loud. There it was, an airline confirmation he thought he'd deleted, but Outlook keeps drafts like ghosts keep whispers. Emirates, first class, 2 seats, $13,972.48. The billing address was ours. I could hear my mother's voice in the back of my head, the one she used when she was tired of being reasonable. Don't wring your hands. Use them. Before I tell you what I did with those hands, here's the rewind that makes it sting. Evan and I met at a Browns watch party at Tina's nightclub on West 7th 6 years ago. He had that high-gloss charm Cleveland guys polish when they're tired of being overlooked. Funny, good jawline, could talk about Lake Erie whether like it was sports stats. I was a nurse at Metro Health. He sold luxury experiences for a travel concierge startup that mostly booked anniversary trips to Aruba for people in Westlake. We got married at the old courthouse under marble, and 2 pigeons who wouldn't leave the rafters. My mom cried happy tears and gave me that cedar box. For a while, life was small but good: Perkins pancakes on Sundays, bad Netflix, a lease-to-own couch we both pretended was mid-century. Then my mom got sick again. Evan said all the right things. We'll handle it. She's your mom, she's our family, whatever it takes. He held my hair when I cried. He also started disappearing. At first it was clients in Detroit, then it was industry conference in Vegas. And then, when Mom went into hospice at the end, it was I need air. He still kissed my forehead. He still put mugs in the dishwasher wrong. I wanted to believe grief made people weird. I kept thinking once Mom was at peace, we'd find our way back to normal, whatever that means when your heart is missing a person. Normal was a lie. It had been a lie since at least July. I learned that night, when 2 charges at the Cleveland Ritz-Carlton lined up with a weekend I'd been sleeping in a vinyl recliner in my mom's room, timing morphine. My phone buzzed again. A text from my cousin. Aunt Deb says Evan was detached today. Is everything okay? She says he was cold to you when he left the wake. Family has a way of turning a knife, then pretending they bumped you. I spent an hour pulling threads. Bank statements, flight confirmation, an Instagram story from a girl tagged at Hopkins with a champagne emoji 2 hours before Mom's funeral started. Her username, at Mia Mile High. Subtle. A geotag in Dubai from her friend group the week before. Evan liked every single post. I didn't call him. I didn't cry again. I opened my email. I started writing. Subject line: regarding fraudulent charges and employee conduct, urgent. I attached the screenshots. I CC'd 2 people I knew would care more than he ever had, and 1 person he'd never thought I had a direct line to. I read it once, twice, 3 times. Then I slid his paper boarding pass, the one I found wedged under our bed frame, printed at the office like he was running copies for a church picnic, next to my laptop as a reminder. I hovered over the blue button for a full 10 seconds, letting the quiet of the house fill with my mother's last piece of advice: use your hands. I hit send on the email too before Evan. I didn't believe in falling in love fast. I thought that was something people said when they confused adrenaline for connection. But he changed that. Or maybe, looking back, he was just really good at knowing what to say to someone who was already running on empty. I was 29, working 12-hour shifts in the oncology ward at Metro Health, halfway through a night shift when I met him. It was December 2018. Snow had been coming down for days, and I remember because the roads were glassy, and my car barely made it home that morning. I stopped at Tina's on West 7th because my friend Jess begged me to be social for once. She said, "You've spent more time with IV poles than people lately." Evan was at the bar wearing a navy sweater and a grin that looked rehearsed but charming anyway. He bought me a drink before I even took off my coat. "You look like you could use something warm," he said. I laughed because I was freezing, and because I liked that he'd noticed me first. He wasn't the type I usually went for. Too smooth, too comfortable in his own skin. But he made me feel seen. Within an hour he'd asked questions no one had ever asked me. What's the hardest part of your day? Who takes care of you when you're the one taking care of everyone else? Those are dangerous questions for a woman like me, someone who spent years patching others up and never thought about her own stitches. By the end of the night, we were sharing fries and swapping childhood stories like we'd been friends forever. When I left, he walked me to my car and texted before I even hit the highway. "Drive safe. You owe me another night." 3 months later, he was practically living in my apartment. 6 months after that, he proposed during a trip to Chicago, at Navy Pier, under fireworks, the whole thing like a movie scene that now feels like it was scripted by a con artist. My mom loved him instantly. She used to say, "You finally found someone who lifts you up, honey." He did lift me up, until he learned how to drop me. The first real crack came 2 years in, when he quit his steady job at the travel agency to start his own luxury experiences company. He said he wanted freedom. I wanted to believe in his dream, so I pulled $8,000 from my savings to help him get it off the ground. For months, the money trickled away into client dinners and branding materials. He swore he had investors lined up. I didn't push too hard, because that's what trust looks like, right? Letting someone find their way. When Mom's cancer came back, I had just been promoted to head nurse for my unit. The same week, Evan's company was restructuring, which meant I was paying most of the bills. Still, he showed up to chemo appointments, brought her smoothies, and told her jokes when she couldn't stop vomiting. Mom adored him. Even when he started missing visits, she made excuses for him. He's probably overwhelmed. You two are young. You'll figure it out. And I believed her, because believing her was easier than facing what I already knew. It wasn't until last spring that I noticed how often his phone was face down. How quickly he'd leave the room to take calls. How networking events always happened on weekends. I had double shifts. Once, he came home smelling like a woman's perfume, sweet and musky, not my scent. He claimed it was a client hugging him goodbye. The night Mom fell and I had to rush her to the ER, Evan didn't answer his phone for 6 hours. When he finally showed up, he said he'd been stuck at a conference in Detroit with no reception. I later saw a tagged photo on Facebook, him in Cleveland at a rooftop bar, drink in hand. I showed it to him. He laughed, said it was an old post, and made me feel crazy for even asking. That's when I learned what kind of liar he was. Not the impulsive kind. The practiced kind. The kind who hides behind your love until you don't recognize your own reflection anymore. When Mom went into hospice, I started sleeping at her house in Shaker Heights most nights. Evan would visit maybe once or twice a week. He'd bring groceries, kiss my cheek, then disappear early the next morning, always with a story about an early flight. He looked tired. I thought it was stress. Now I know it was guilt. Her death hit me like a physical blow. I could barely stand at her service. And while I was collapsing under the weight of losing her, he was already halfway out the door, planning a new life while I was still writing her obituary. The day after the funeral, I spent hours replaying everything. Every text, every late-night excuse, every fake apology. It all lined up once the money trail appeared. My mom's medical fund, the one thing sacred to me. That's what he stole to run off with her. You might think that would break me. It didn't. It calcified me, because once I knew where he went, and who with, I started connecting dots I didn't even know existed. And that email I sent, it wasn't to Evan. It was to his company's biggest client, his business partner, and a journalist who had already been sniffing around a travel scam linked to Evan's startup. That was just the beginning. Because when I found out what Mia's real connection to him was, not just a mistress, but something way uglier, I realized this wasn't only about betrayal. It was about fraud, blackmail, and a secret my husband thought he buried 3 years ago. And I was about to dig it up. I didn't sleep that night. The glow of the laptop burned my eyes until dawn, but I couldn't stop. It was like my brain was on autopilot, sorting through the mess of my marriage as if the right combination of screenshots and receipts would make sense of it all. At 3:47 a.m., I got an email back, one of the CC'd names I'd included out of pure spite. Thomas Laird, co-founder of Evan's travel startup Voyage Lux. His reply was short, "Call me." Now, my stomach twisted. I dialed before I could talk myself out of it. He picked up on the first ring. "He used the company card, didn't he?" Thomas said. "Worse," I said. "He used my dead mother's medical fund." There was a pause. I could hear him exhale hard, then say something muffled, probably to someone else in the room. "You're not the first to say he's been stealing." That made me sit up. "Excuse me." "Look," he said, his tone low. "I can't put this in writing, but he's been moving client deposits into his personal accounts. I've been collecting evidence for weeks. You just handed me the last piece I needed." I sat there, fingers gripping the edge of the desk. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. But all I said was, "What happens now?" Thomas's voice hardened. Now I make sure he never books another flight under this company's name again." By sunrise, the email chain I started had turned into a wildfire. I watched as more and more people got copied in. Lawyers, accountants, even a woman named Sarah from the Department of Commerce. Turns out Evan wasn't just a cheating husband, He was under quiet investigation for defrauding a dozen clients. I had accidentally fast-tracked his downfall, but it wasn't enough. Not for me. I wanted him to feel what it was like to stand in front of something sacred, something he'd promised to protect, and watch it rot because of him. So I started digging deeper. First, I found Mia's LinkedIn. Her last name was Kenton. 27 years old. Influencer marketing consultant for Voyage Luxe. I clicked through her profile and my breath caught at the second photo. Evan was in it, arm draped over her shoulders, both of them smiling at some event in New York. Caption, proud to be building dreams with this visionary. The timestamp was 8 months before my mom died. Then I found her Instagram. Pictures of beaches, champagne, hotel lobbies, all tagged with the company hashtag Evan created. I scrolled until I found one from 2 months ago, a photo of her sitting on his lap, blurry, obviously taken in a mirror. His face wasn't visible, but the reflection in her sunglasses gave him away. I knew that shirt. I'd folded it that morning before my shift. I remember staring at the screen so long my eyes started to sting. That was when I noticed something strange. In one of her photos, posted the same weekend, he claimed to be meeting investors in Miami. She was in a suite with a view of a skyline that wasn't Miami. It was Cleveland, specifically the 9 Hotel downtown. I recognized the view because that's where we'd spent our anniversary last year. He'd even told me the room had been comped as part of his company perks. So he'd been using the same bed for both of us. I wanted to vomit. The next day, I drove to his office. Not because I wanted to see him, I didn't even know if he was back in the country, but because I wanted something physical. Something I could use. When I walked in, the receptionist froze like she'd seen a ghost. Hi, Mrs. Randall, she said quietly. Evan isn't, I know, I cut her off. I'm just here for some paperwork. I didn't wait for permission. I went straight to his office. His name was still on the door. Inside, everything was too clean. His laptop was gone, but there were file folders stacked neatly on his desk. I started flipping through them. Invoices, receipts, a few contracts with fake signatures I recognized, my mother's included. He'd forged her name on an insurance reimbursement document to funnel money into his own account. That's when I found the USB drive. Labeled, Client Proofs. I pocketed it. Later that night, I opened the drive on my computer. It wasn't client photos, it was folders of scanned IDs, credit card authorizations, wire transfers, and emails between Evan and Mia. And one folder that froze my blood cold. Emergency insurance payouts. Inside, there were PDFs from hospital systems, including mine. Records from when my mother was first hospitalized, but with altered bank routing numbers. He had rerouted her insurance reimbursements into his shell account. He didn't just take my money, he stole from my mother while she was dying. I sat there staring at her name, at the line where her bloodwork results were attached, and I swear I could feel her hand on my shoulder like she was saying, now you know. That night, I printed every single file. I put them in a manila envelope and drove it to Thomas's office drop box. But even as I was doing it, something gnawed at me. Something didn't add up about Mia. Why would Evan risk everything? His company, his marriage, his reputation, for some influencer with 12,000 followers and a brand deal with a teeth whitening company? Unless she wasn't who she said she was. Because when I cross-referenced her name with the company registration Evan had filed, I found something impossible. She wasn't just his mistress. She was his business partner. And her legal name wasn't Mia Kenton. It was Mia Laird, Thomas's younger sister. The same man who had just sworn to destroy Evan for stealing from him. And I had just handed him every weapon he needed. When I realized who Mia really was, Thomas Laird's sister, it was like the air in the room disappeared. All that satisfaction I'd felt sending those emails turned to acid. I'd just blown up my husband's life and handed the evidence to a man who might have been playing his own game all along. I didn't sleep for 2 days. I kept replaying every word Thomas had said on the phone. The way he'd been so calm. The way he never asked how I'd gotten the screenshots, just that knowing, low voice saying, "You just handed me the last piece I needed." What if the piece wasn't about justice? What if it was about leverage? I needed answers, so I called him again. He didn't pick up. I left a voicemail. "Thomas, we need to talk. It's about your sister." 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number, it was Mia. "Stop poking around," she said flatly. You've done enough damage. I didn't say a word. My pulse was in my ears. You think you understand what's going on, but you don't, she continued. You don't know who you're dealing with. And then she hung up. I sat on my bed, shaking. Every part of me screamed to call the police, but what would I even say? That my cheating husband and his mistress had stolen my dead mother's medical fund and fled to Dubai, and now the mistress, who's also his business partner's sister, was threatening me. No cop in Cleveland would take that seriously without evidence that didn't look like a soap opera. So I did what nurses do best. I observed. Over the next week, I tracked everything. Every time Thomas emailed, every time Mia posted, every transaction that showed up in the company's records. And slowly, the pattern formed. Evan had been the face of VoyageLux, the flashy salesman. Mia had been the creative lead, handling clients and social media. But Thomas, he handled the backend, the banking, the compliance. They were all in it together. Every fraudulent payment I thought Evan had funneled alone, every insurance reimbursement, every refundable luxury package, they'd all signed off on. I could see it in the metadata of the documents on that USB drive. Each file had timestamps showing 3 users accessing them. E. Randall, M. Laird, T. Laird. I felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. This wasn't some impulsive affair. This was a full-scale con. And the part that gutted me most wasn't even that Evan cheated. It was that my mother's death had been part of their plan. Because as I went through those forged hospital records again, I noticed something I'd missed. One of the reimbursement forms was dated 2 weeks before my mom actually passed. He'd filed it before she was even gone. He knew she wouldn't make it. He was just waiting for the right moment to cash in. That's when everything in me went cold. I started connecting the dots backward. The sudden push for me to move Mom to hospice early. The way Evan had insisted he'd handle the paperwork so I could focus on grieving. The way Thomas had called right after the funeral, pretending he didn't know about the stolen funds. They'd all known. The only thing they didn't know was that I wasn't done. So I played dumb. I didn't respond to Mia's threat. I didn't tell Thomas I knew. I started gathering quietly, because revenge only works when the other side doesn't see it coming. I talked to an old friend, Jordan, who used to work in the fraud department at Citizens Bank. I told him I was helping with an estate issue. I gave him the account numbers, the routing numbers, the shell company names. 3 days later, he called me back. You weren't wrong, he said, but you were only half right. How so? I asked. Evan wasn't the one who opened those fake accounts, he said. They were opened under Thomas Laird's name, all of them. I just sat there, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter while the world tilted sideways. So he set Evan up. Jordan's voice was low. Looks that way. Your husband might be a piece of work, but he's not the architect. Thomas was laundering the stolen funds through accounts in his own name, then letting Evan take the fall. And that's when it hit me. That email I sent, the one that exposed Evan, was exactly what Thomas needed to close the loop. I hadn't ruined them. I'd cleaned up their mess for them. By outing Evan publicly and linking all the transactions to his name, I'd made Thomas and Mia look like the victims of their rogue partner. I didn't just lose my husband. I'd been used by the very people I thought were helping me destroy him. It was a betrayal stacked on betrayal. Evan's cruelty, Mia's manipulation, Thomas's precision. Each one calculated, like they'd mapped my grief and chosen the exact places to stab. But they underestimated one thing. They thought I was done fighting. They thought the broken widow with red eyes and hospital bills would stay quiet. They didn't realize I'd already learned the hard way how to keep someone alive past their expiration date. And I was about to keep this story alive until it buried them all. Because the thing about grief, it makes you fearless. And the thing about revenge, it starts with one email, but it ends with blood. After I realized Thomas and Mia had used me as a weapon, something inside me changed. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was planning. Grief had kept me soft. Betrayal turned me methodical. The first step was to disappear emotionally, digitally, financially. I stopped posting, stopped answering texts from my family. Everyone thought I'd finally crashed from the funeral stress. That worked perfectly. It gave me time to think, to map, to build. I started by studying VoyageLux. Their website, their clients, their branding partners. I dug through everything public. Press releases, event listings, testimonials. I learned that they had one major client keeping the company afloat. Parallax International, a Chicago-based firm that outsourced all its executive retreats to them. It was the contract that had made Thomas brag on LinkedIn about record-breaking growth. I made a burner Gmail, posing as a Parallax travel coordinator named Rachel Pierce. Then I sent Thomas an email. "Hello, Thomas. Rachel from Parallax here. Our compliance team is updating vendor files, and we noticed some inconsistencies on your company's routing information. Could you please confirm your wire details by Friday?" Rachel, within 4 hours, he responded. Attached was a scanned W-9 with his personal routing number listed under VoyageLux Travel Holdings LLC. That's all I needed. It confirmed what Jordan said. He'd been funneling money through personal accounts. I took screenshots, metadata, timestamps, everything. Then I called Jordan again. "Can you do something with this?" I asked. He whistled low when he saw it. "Yeah, that's wire fraud." "Serious time." "I want it airtight," I said. "I want him trapped before he even knows he's caught." "Then you'll need to bait him," Jordan said. "Give him a reason to move money." So that became the next step. Mia had been quiet online for a week. Then, one night, she posted a selfie from a rooftop in Dubai with the caption, "Back to paradise with my favorite person. New beginnings, palm sparkles," and there he was, blurry in the background, Evan. He looked smaller somehow, thinner. The comments were full of heart emojis and "you two are goals." It made my stomach turn, but it also gave me an idea. I still had access to our joint bank account. He'd never removed me, probably forgot, or maybe assumed I wouldn't dare. The balance was low, but not zero. So I wired $2,000 into it from my personal savings with the memo line. For hospital refund. Within 48 hours, that same $2,000 appeared in one of Thomas's laundering accounts. Evan had forwarded it straight through. He was still being used like a mule, probably without even realizing it. That transaction gave Jordan and me the proof of an ongoing scheme across state lines, which meant federal jurisdiction. But I wasn't done. I didn't just want them arrested, I wanted them ruined. Publicly. So I turned my focus to the clients. Every one of them had glowing testimonials on the VoyageLux site. I started reaching out one by one from the burner account. "Dear client, we are updating records following an internal audit. Can you confirm you received your refund for the canceled booking dated X?" The replies flooded in. Dozens said the same thing. No refunds, no responses, months of silence. That's when I built the folder. A neat, devastating folder titled VoyageLux Scam, Client Statements and Proof. Inside. Screenshots of the fraudulent transfers. Forged insurance reimbursements. Mia's social media flaunting luxury hotels. The routing number evidence. The proof of them transferring my mom's fund. And at the very top, a photo of my mom, smiling, scarf on her head, holding a "Keep Fighting" mug. I added a line underneath. "This woman paid for their paradise." I uploaded everything to a Google Drive. Then I drafted a message. I wasn't sure who I'd send it to yet, a journalist, maybe, or one of those expose the scammer subreddits that eat people alive. But I knew it had to go wide. Still, part of me wanted Evan to see it first. To know before the world knew, so I called him. He actually picked up. "Hey," he said cautiously, like he'd just seen my name pop up on a list of things he thought he'd buried. "Do you know where I am right now?" I asked. Silence, then Cleveland. "No," I said. "I'm at your office. I just came to drop something off." What are you talking about?" I smiled even though he couldn't see it. "Evidence, Evan." "Real evidence? You should check your email." I hung up. At that same moment, I hit send on an email titled, "For when you start to realize she's not who you think she is." Attached were screenshots of Mia's real identity, her being Thomas's sister, her involvement in the bank accounts, the metadata showing she'd edited the fake contracts. 10 minutes later, my phone blew up. 6 missed calls, 3 voicemails, 1 text from an unknown number that said, "You don't know what you've just done." I didn't answer. Because I did know. I just dropped a bomb into their little empire. But what I didn't expect, what blindsided me completely, was what happened next. Because 2 days later, the FBI showed up at my door. And the evidence they had wasn't just about them. It had my name on it too. When the knock came, it wasn't the kind of knock you ignore. It was the kind that rattles the doorframe and tells you whoever's on the other side already knows your name. Two men in dark jackets stood there, badges in hand. "Mrs. Randall," one asked, "we're with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with you about a financial investigation involving Voyage Lux Travel Holdings." My stomach dropped, but I stepped aside. "Of course," I said. "I've been waiting for someone to. We're aware of your email activity," the other one cut in, "and the money transfers tied to your joint account." That stopped me cold. I tried to explain about the stolen medical fund, about Evan, about Thomas and Mia, but the agent, the older one, raised his hand. "We'll get to that. But first, can you explain why your name is listed as a co-owner on the shell company that received nearly $80,000 in wire transfers?" My vision tunneled. "That's not possible," I said. "I never," he handed me a printout. And there it was. A legal document filed under Voyage Lux Holdings LLC subsidiary, signed digitally by Evan Randall and Claire Randall, my signature. Except I had never seen that paperwork in my life. The agent's voice softened slightly, like he'd seen this before. "We've had issues with identity misuse in cases like this, ma'am. But until we verify, you're considered part of the investigation." My mouth went dry. "You think I helped them?" He didn't answer. He just handed me a subpoena. They left after 20 minutes, taking my laptop and a stack of printed bank statements. When the door shut, I sat on the floor, shaking. I hadn't realized how deep they'd buried me. That fake signature, it wasn't just sloppy forgery. It was perfect. Evan had access to everything. My driver's license, my digital signature file, even my tax info from when I helped him register his business. He'd cloned my signature months ago, maybe longer. They hadn't just used me. They'd built the entire scam under my name. Every transaction I'd exposed, every stolen dollar. As far as the banks were concerned, I was one of the thieves. It was a setup, start to finish. I called Jordan in a panic. He went quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Claire, listen. You remember those shell accounts? The ones I traced to Thomas? Well, I dug deeper after you called last time. He was smart. He used IP masking. But the original account that opened them wasn't his." My breath caught. "Whose was it?" "Yours," Jordan said quietly. "The first routing came from your home Wi-Fi, and before you say it, no, I don't think you did it. Someone must have logged in from your network. I checked the timestamp. It's from January, when your mom was still alive." That was the same month Evan started, working late every night. He'd been sitting at our kitchen table, building a scam empire with my name as the front. The realization hit like a punch. The affair, the theft, the medical fund, it had all been one long, deliberate setup. The mistress and her brother weren't just side players. They were his insurance policy. Evan had made himself the fall guy only if things went wrong, because, on paper, I was the one who looked guilty. The perfect exit plan. And now I'd accelerated it. My emails to clients, my public exposure of his company, I'd given the FBI a clear trail straight to me. By the time I fully understood, it was already too late. The media had picked up the story. "Cleveland nurse implicated in $1.2 M travel scam," the headline read. "Funds laundered through dead mother's hospice account." My coworkers stopped calling. My manager at Metro Health suggested I take indefinite leave. I was radioactive. The only one who reached out was, of all people, Thomas. He texted from a new number. "You weren't supposed to be part of this. Let's meet." "I can fix it." I stared at the message for hours. My brain screamed trap, but something in me, maybe the part that still wanted to believe someone could explain all of this, said yes. We met at a diner off I-480, the kind of place that smells like old grease and broken promises. He sat in a corner booth, sunglasses on even though it was night. He looked tired, older. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "You're smart, Claire," he said. "But you made one mistake. You thought Evan was the puppeteer." I leaned in. "Then who is?" He smiled without humor. "My sister, Mia." I froze. He continued, "Evan didn't plan any of this. He was in debt, bad debt. Gambling, mostly. Mia found him, offered him a way out. She used him, used me. I was supposed to believe we were all partners, but really she was pulling every string." He slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were photocopies of wire transfers, all leading back to one name, Mia Kenton Holdings Limited, a Dubai account. "She moved everything offshore," he said. Once Evan's name went public and your signature tied you to the LLC, she disappeared with the money. Left us both holding the bag. I didn't know whether to believe him, but the numbers matched. The Dubai transfer date was the same day I buried my mother. That's when it hit me, the email she'd sent me, the warning call after I started digging. You don't know who you're dealing with. She hadn't been bluffing. She'd been telling the truth. Evan Thomas, even me, we were all pawns. And Mia was already gone. But she'd made one mistake, too. When she'd forged the documents to tie me to the scam, she'd used an old version of my driver's license, one that expired 2 years earlier. And the metadata from that scan. It carried a digital fingerprint, the same one I could now trace directly back to her laptop, thanks to the files I'd found on that USB drive. Thomas didn't know that. Evan didn't either. But I did. And I wasn't going to the FBI to clear my name. I was going after her. Because the only thing more dangerous than a grieving widow is a woman with nothing left to lose and a hard drive full of proof. You don't get to this point in a story like mine without wanting to know why. Why someone would do something this cruel, this targeted. Why they'd twist grief into leverage and make a dying woman's fun their ticket to freedom. I wanted that answer too. I needed it because it wasn't enough to just expose Mia. I needed to understand what kind of person could look me in the eye, smile, and still decide I deserved to be destroyed. I found her answer in Dubai. Not physically, I couldn't exactly fly there with the FBI watching me, but digitally. Her Instagram went quiet, her accounts went private, but her old business filings were still public. I dug through the UAE corporate registry and found something interesting. Mia Kenton Holdings Limited had a silent partner listed. Randall E. Evan. The bastard hadn't been left behind. He was in on the escape. And that account, the one with my mom's stolen money, wasn't just some offshore vault. It was an investment fund. A shell company designed to buy shares in something called Hailed Genesis Ventures. I looked it up expecting another fake brand, but it was real, a biotech startup. I scrolled through its site confused until I saw the board of directors, and there she was. Dr. Miriam Kenton, Mia's mother, a medical researcher. The woman who had overseen a clinical trial for a chemo drug that my mother had been prescribed. I felt the world tilt. It wasn't random. It wasn't opportunistic. It wasn't about a fling or a getaway. It had started long before I ever met Evan. I went through the hospital billing history again, this time line by line. When Mom's oncologist switched her medication halfway through treatment, he mentioned a new supplier deal that made it cheaper. The drug had arrived through a distributor linked to, you guessed it, Hailed Genesis Ventures. So my mother had been a patient on one of their early discount programs. She'd signed a consent form that included insurance reimbursements routed through approved affiliates. Mia's mother's company. That meant my mom's insurance and hospital data had passed through their system, complete with my contact info, my address, my email. That's how Mia found me. That's how Evan found me. It hadn't been coincidence that he showed up at Tina's bar that night, or that he seemed to know exactly what questions to ask to make me open up. He hadn't fallen for me. He'd been sent to me. I was the mark. The perfect target. A nurse, someone with access to hospital accounts, someone who'd eventually handle large medical funds and trust too easily. Evan's charm wasn't luck. It was strategy. And Mia had orchestrated every step. She'd used her mother's pharmaceutical network to identify families of terminal patients, people with money tucked away for treatment, and then sent consultants like Evan to infiltrate, gain trust, and extract access. My family's grief had been their business plan. That's what the entire scam had been about, monetizing death. I went cold reading through the evidence. The offshore accounts weren't random theft. They were part of a pattern. The trial data, the patients, the timing, all of it aligned. They'd been siphoning money from insurance reimbursements tied to clinical participants, laundering it through fake travel companies to make it look like marketing expenses. It was horrifyingly clever and brutally personal, because when my mom was dying, Mia wasn't just watching from the outside. She knew who we were, she had our records, she had everything. She'd studied me the way a hunter studies her prey, not to kill fast, but to bleed slowly. And Evan, he'd been the bait. He'd played husband while feeding data back to Mia's side. He'd probably never loved me at all, not even in the beginning. Every kiss, every promise, every "we'll handle it together" was part of a long con that started the day my mom signed that damn consent form. I sat there in my apartment, hands shaking, surrounded by open folders and printed emails, realizing that my marriage had been engineered, built on my mother's illness, my vulnerability, my kindness. It wasn't infidelity. It was infiltration. That's when the anger stopped feeling hot and started feeling cold. Because now I understood exactly what I was fighting. Not just betrayal, not even greed, control. Mia had wanted to control everything, the narrative, the company, the money, the people. And to her, my grief wasn't tragic. It was convenient. She'd chosen me because she thought I'd never fight back. She thought I'd crumble quietly like all the others she'd stolen from. But she made one mistake, the same mistake they all made. She left a trail, a metadata fingerprint that could tie her company to fraudulent insurance transfers across 3 states. A connection that could turn her biotech empire into a criminal investigation. And I was going to use it, not just to clear my name, but to burn down everything she'd ever built. Because if she wanted control, I was going to take it from her, piece by piece. I told myself from the beginning that I didn't want revenge that felt like vengeance for vengeance's sake. I wanted something that fixed the mess they made, not by burning everything down in a fantasy, but by making the truth sit on top of their heads until it crushed them. That's the kind of revenge I could live with. The cold kind. The kind that didn't need me to stoop to their level. The dossier I compiled was ugly and precise. The forged W-9 that used Thomas's routing numbers, the email headers showing Mia's laptop edited the hospital PDFs, the Hail Genesis investment links that traced money from Dubai back into a biotech boardroom with Dr. Miriam Kenton's name on it. It had client statements, bank transfers with timestamps, the USB files, and the photo of my mother with the caption I'd typed beneath it. Not for show, but to remind myself why I was doing this. I duplicated everything, encrypted the copies, and spread them like seeds where they would take root. An independent investigative reporter in Cleveland I'd found weeks earlier, a federal prosecutor Jordan trusted at a U.S. attorney's office, and the Department of Health and Human Services fraud unit. I also kept one set close, a sealed packet for my lawyer, the woman who'd represented nurses through malpractice suits and who looked at me once and said, "You don't owe anyone quiet." She filed whistleblower paperwork that morning. She filed it under my name and under the names of dozens of clients whose bookings vanished into the ether. That turned this from one woman's claim into a pattern worthy of a federal sweep. 2 weeks later, the first knock I wanted came, not the terrifying one with badges that accused me, but the one I'd been waiting for. Reporters at my door, neutral and professional, holding copies of a story that ripped the roof off the whole scheme. Voyage Lux, Hail Genesis, and a doctor's link to redirected patient funds. The headline read. The story splayed the same receipts and metadata I'd sent, except this time, it framed it exactly as it was. Not a grieving widow's rant, but a long con run through clinical trials and offshore accounts. The reaction was almost immediate. The U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed a sealed indictment. The Department of Justice served search warrants in Cleveland, at Thomas's home, and finally, at Hail Genesis's small, glassy headquarters. The FBI executed an international subpoena that traced SWIFT transfers out of Dubai. The shell company Mia used had a paper trail she thought she'd scrubbed clean but hadn't. An intermediary bank in Cyprus that left a breadcrumb. They followed it. There are a few things I learned watching people who'd smiled at my mother in hospice get led away. The first is that guilt has 1,000 faces. Some are replaced by pleading and others by fury. Thomas called me twice that day, his voice raw. "I can help you, Claire." I listened to him stumble through excuses, and I let him. He was smart enough to know which way the wind blew, smart enough to realize Mia had used him as a prop. He hadn't played clean, he'd laundered money, but the evidence showed he'd also been trying to keep the company alive as the house of cards trembled. In the end, he made a deal, testimony for a reduced sentence. He handed over emails and bank passwords that spelled out the offshore routes. That's the second thing I learned. When the walls close in, people start talking. Mia tried to disappear. She'd gone dark the day the subpoenas went out. An international arrest warrant followed once the prosecutors had enough to connect her to the Dubai accounts. The biotech boardroom was a different story. Dr. Miriam Kenton's resignation was swift and quiet. The indictment named her for her role in routing reimbursements through affiliate channels she controlled. It called her greed what it was, a criminal fraud that preyed on terminal patients. I watched a woman who had been a clinician turned into a defendant, and I felt a cold, slow kind of relief. Evan's fate wasn't cinematic. He landed on my doorstep 2 weeks after the arrests, hands trembling, claiming he wanted to make amends. I let him talk at the kitchen table while I poured coffee I didn't want. He said he'd been trying to get out when it all unraveled, that Mia had threatened him, that Thomas had blackmailed him with fake investor threats. He asked for forgiveness like it was a thing you could hand over the counter. I listened, and then I did the last piece of simple cruelty that felt like a cure. I handed him a printed copy of every email he'd ever sent me where he'd called himself partner and husband, as if those words meant anything. "Take them to your attorney," I said. "You'll need them." He left without the coffee. When the trial calendar filled, I sat in the back of the courtroom more times than I can count. I testified once, calmly, with the kind of clinical detail I'd used in my dossier. I didn't scream. I didn't plead. I told the truth about invoices and signatures, and my mother's account numbers like a nurse reading data on a monitor. Thomas's cooperation narrowed his sentence. Mia faced extradition. Dr. Kenton was disbarred from biotech boards and hit with restitution orders so large they will haunt her for the rest of her life. The public reaction was complicated. My family had to reckon with its own part. The way cousins and aunts had looked at me while I grieved and assumed I'd driven my husband away. Some relationships never recovered. My brother and I made peace later, but not overnight. Work was another mountain. I took time off, came back, and found the staff room full of whispered questions. MetroHealth eventually cleared me, offered an apology that tasted like insurance. The institution paid for grief counseling for the families affected by the scheme. It was a small, formal kind of justice. The last twist, the one nobody saw coming, but I suspected all along, came quietly. A month after the convictions, a federal auditor called me and said, "We've recovered a portion of the funds, not everything, but enough for a foundation." They wanted to set up a restitution fund in my mother's name for families who'd been defrauded while navigating serious illness. I signed the paperwork with hands that still remembered cold hospital linoleum and the smell of morphine. We named it the Margaret Randolph Fund for Patient Protection. It would be audited, strict, and painfully bureaucratic. Everything my mother would have hated and loved equally. I used the first grant to help a family who'd lost life savings to a fake clinical trial. I sat with them in a hospital lobby and listened as they cried. The money didn't bring anyone back. It didn't erase the nights I'd sat with my mother and the mornings she didn't wake up. But it turned the worst of their greed into something that could at least keep one other bed from being emptied by con artists. Sometimes people ask me if I feel vindicated. I tell them the truth. The court's verdict and the indictments felt like a hand finally lifted off my throat. But vindication is a small word for what I needed. I wanted to be seen. I wanted the stolen names to be attached to faces, and for those faces to be accountable. The house is quieter now. I keep the cedar box on my dresser. The inscription inside is my mother's handwriting, and when I open it, I see her photograph and a folded hospital bracelet I couldn't bear to throw away. I go to work. I care for strangers who trust nurses with their worst hours. Some nights I dream of flight manifests and boarding passes. Other nights I dream of my mother laughing about the way I fold towels. Evan texted once from a halfway house. "I'm sorry," I didn't answer. He left a voicemail begging me to meet him at the old courthouse where we were married. I shredded it. What he did wasn't the end of the story I wanted. It was a chapter. The trial closed the book for some of them. For the rest, I built something that would keep the pages from being used again. I didn't need first-class seats or private getaways. I needed the facts to be heavier than their lies. I needed their names to be searchable and their signatures unusable. I got that. I also got something I didn't expect, a quiet kind of power that comes from knowing you can survive deliberate cruelty and still stand in the sun. On the day the fund mailed our first check, I drove to Lakeview Cemetery and sat by my mother's stone. I told her, out loud, what I'd done. I told her I'd turned her pain into protection for others. I told her I'd finally stopped waiting for someone else to make things right. She would have hated the word revenge. She would have said something practical. You did the sensible thing, Claire. Maybe she was right. But revenge tastes different when it's measured and legal and folded into an application form. I folded the last of the paperwork into the cedar box. Then I walked back to my car, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't look back. If anyone asks what I learned, I tell them this: predators pick the wounded. The smart ones pick the wounds they think no one will touch. I picked mine up, examined it, and used it as evidence. Turns out, sometimes the only way out of grief is through the paperwork.